Yeah, we're live. It is 7:17 in the sevens. As a matter of fact, there are two sevens there, so that's twice as good, right? Hopefully, everybody's doing well. So, welcome to another live feed. If you've never been here before, this is not your typical video. I post those as well, where they're 10 or 15 minutes, and we're talking about dyno testing and that kind of stuff. This is a live feed, so you get to interact. You get to come here, make comments, ask questions, do whatever you want for the Q&A. I will have a little discussion at the beginning, 10 minutes or so. I'll talk about something, some sort of subject, and then I'll get right to interacting with people, answering questions. We'll have discussions. We'll talk about UFOs and big feet, and that's multiple Bigfoot. So the people that were wondering, but that's what we do. So if you're looking for something that's a quick answer and you're impatient, don't watch. This is going to be an hour. We're going to be doing this a while. Everybody loves it. Except for the people that make negative comments. I don't know what their deal is. So welcome, everybody. And tonight we're going to talk about the video. I just posted up a video, so I don't know if you guys have even seen it. I just posted a video. If you're a big block Ford fan, you should like it because it is part 2 of the one that I posted last night. So spoiler alert, don't jump in on part 2 if you haven't seen part 1. You don't want to see Empire or Jedi before you see Star Wars. Yeah, 1977 reference. Way to go. But so watch part 1 if you haven't seen it. That's where we did the big block Ford modifications because, everybody, we do Chevy stuff all the time. So big block Fords need some attention. So back in part 1, we did 300, 400, 500, and 600 horsepower combinations, all using the stock iron heads. They were ported in some cases, mildly ported, and then more extensively ported, but still the stock iron heads, 600 horsepower, flat tappet cams, never even stepped up to roller stuff. That's part 1. But in part 2, we threw all those rules basically just out the window. So in part 2, more stuff. The only thing I didn't do, which I'm disappointed in myself, and I'm sure you guys, we'll hear about that, is there's no boost. And I haven't run any boost on the big block Ford stuff yet. And I need to. I realize that's an oversight on my part, and it's something I need to address, and I will. I will make a guarantee that I will address that this year. And I also have 2 cars I have to get running this year. And we're already in May, so things are not happening. I need to get the next one done pretty quickly here to stay on track. And I don't want to be working on the other one like during Christmas. So I don't want to be working on it like between Christmas and New Year's so that I can get it done technically before the end of the year. So I want to have the Mustang and the Z both running, and the Omni is already running. So it's already on its way to being painted and everything. I don't care about the other 2. I don't care that they be pristine or whatever. They just need to run and they need to drive and that sort of thing. So that will be important. But I will run boost on some kind of big block Ford. So that you guys heard it here. So you have to hold me to that. But part 2 was, as I said, other than boost, we did aluminum heads. So lots of aftermarket heads. We did trick flow. We did the Ford Super Cobra Jet stuff. And the regular, well, I don't think we had any regular Cobra Jet stuff. The Super Cobra Jet stuff, airflow research, and trick flow. So we had, good aftermarket aluminum heads and stuff. We had lots of displacement, 514, 520, and 557 stuff. And that's one of the reasons that the big block Ford is so cool. And I may do another video on that. That's going to really make the Chevy guys, upset when I tell them about why the big block Ford is better than the big block Chevy. So I might just do that just because. So strokers and aluminum heads. We also did roller cams. We went away from flat tapping cams. We went to roller stuff, solid roller stuff, in fact. And then also we went with so displacement, roller cams, aluminum heads, and then power adders too, because we ran nitrous on a few things. So to get the highest power level, we certainly ran nitrous. In fact, to run the 1,000 horsepower one and the 1,100 horsepower for those, as a spoiler alert, we ran nitrous on them. And so we ran, but lots of cool different combinations, and to show you kind of what's going on. The photo that I have up, the thumbnail, in fact, we can bring that up. I'll see if I can grab that here. There we go. So this is our thumbnail for the people that you can see. Pretty cool. Certainly my favorite, if I had a favorite, my favorite big block Ford. This was the 557, the Trick Flow A460 CNC ported heads. You can see what do we recognize about the headers on this? And if you go ahead, let me know in the comments. What do you recognize about these headers? What makes these headers different? And you can see we had a crank trigger on this. That's because we had this tunnel ram. And also you'd see our a little crab cap distributor to be underneath that to fit on that tunnel ram. Also tunnel ram, two dominators, two 1050 Ultra dominators. So not an inexpensive induction system. Nice Moroso oil pan, which is good. And 557 cubic inches and 12.5 to 1. So it had some compression, although Brule would be mad at me because I'm right in the no man's land. Basically, it's like, why would you do 12.5? Why don't you just do 14 and then make it a compression motor and not a mid compression motor? He doesn't like the 11.5, 12.5 range. He's like, look, either make it a 10 to 1 or less, blower motor or whatever, and if you're going to make it a compression motor at 12.5, you're probably going to have to put good gas in it anyway. So you might as well just get the extra stuff because you're going to have to get it for, just make it 14 to 1. And he's right about that. If you're going to do an only compression motor, then you might as well just step up and make it a compression motor and not don't wade halfway in, go all the way in. So we have that. And that's very cool. The tunnel ram stuff, picked up power. In fact, that's going to be our big block question, our poll for today. It's going to be big block related. Broker Ford. Okay, so on a 557 Ford, it could be a Chevy also too, doesn't really matter for this question. Would you spend the extra money on a tunnel ram and dual dominators? Because that's not a cheap date. You're talking about that's going to be a $3,000 or more induction system. So would you spend that money on dominators as opposed to running a single dominator? And because that's what you would have to run on a combination like this, it's going to want at least one dominator, and quite honestly it wants two. But would you step up to the tunnel ram setup to gain 50 horsepower? Is that amount of money worth a 50 horsepower gain? And here's an important thing to think about, and I'm going to go ahead and post the poll. For normal wrecking yard guys, that's not even a consideration. But here are the people that I want to ask this about, because getting the first 50 horsepower, like we saw, we take a wrecking yard motor and we put a cam in it, we can get 50 horsepower, and you got it pretty cheaply. I mean, you bought a couple $100 cam. The last 50 horsepower is really, really expensive. It's much harder to get. Not only do you have to spend the money, but you have to spend the money properly, because you don't know if the thing that you're going to do and you're going to change is actually going to give you the gain that you're looking for. And what if it only gives you 8 horsepower or 16? What is the number? When you're going from 900 to 950, that's harder to do. Going from 400 to 450, that's pretty easy. But and as you go beyond that, it gets even harder when you go from 1,000 to 1,050 or 1,100 to 1,150 or 12 to 1,250, especially when we're talking about NA combinations. That last 50 gets hard to come by, and it gets more and more expensive the farther up that scale you go. So let me know what you guys are thinking on the poll there. But like I said, this big block Ford was cool. It had a lot of things they don't normally do, but it was missing some things. I was impressed with the power 925 or 930 or something. I was impressed that we could make that kind of NA power and use the stock block, although I don't know how long that sort of thing will last at that power level and that displacement, that bore and stroke level. A couple of things that this didn't have, even though it was a for me, a kind of out there NA combination. It didn't have shaft rockers, it didn't have a Jessel system or a T&D. It probably would be better for those trick flow heads to have that. It was making peak power pretty high. It was above 7,000 RPM for a motor that's making that kind of power. Obviously didn't have a dry sump, but it did have, it just had regular, kind of roller rockers. It did have, titanium retainers. I don't think that this thing had titanium valves in it either. I don't think it did. I have to go back and look at the specs, but I don't think it did. So we're getting up near, where that would start being a consideration when you're looking at that kind of valve weight. And then, when you're going into the 7,500 and higher range, you'd start looking at stuff like that for valve control. Certainly, and this was an off-the-shelf kind of camshaft, not anything custom. And I don't know about I haven't seen any Spintron data on it, so I don't know how stable the camshaft is and stuff. It seemed to work okay on what we were doing. And all these other things start becoming considerations. Your oiling system, it was just it was a good pan and a windage tray and that kind of stuff. This is a Moroso deal, if I remember right. And then, but you would start thinking about things like a dry sump if you're going up into this power level and this kind of RPM range. You start thinking about all that stuff. It all becomes like, way more important. And you start looking at like I said, start looking at the little things. So, well, maybe I need like a really good low tension ring pack, and I need the piston to go along with that. And it's become, again, cha-ching, cha-ching, it's more expensive. Maybe I need to mill or further port the A460 heads, cha-ching, cha-ching. Maybe I need to send the tunnel ram to the Wilson and have them work their magic on it for even more power, cha-ching, cha-ching. Again, all of that is like, that kind of porting on the manifold on tunnel ram could be as expensive or more expensive than the tunnel ram was itself. So all of that stuff is, and that's what happens with racing is as we want to make more and more power and we go faster and faster, all of the things become like exponentially more expensive. You're like, I can't go to the wrecking yard and just go get an old 8.8 or a 9-inch or something. No, you need like the real deal when you start talking about, hey, I put together something that makes 2,000 horsepower. That's really good. Now go find out how much the 2,000 horsepower other stuff is. It's not low buck like you were able to get that sort of combination together. So it gets more and more expensive, and that's that's part of the deal. That's why I like to stay at regular power levels. And that's why most of the stuff that I do on this channel is about regular kind of power levels. I don't, Morris builds good motors and Nelson and those guys and their clientele wants that kind of stuff. And, that's not me. I'm not that guy. So our poll is getting split, but more no's than yeses right now, 44% and 56%, although we only have 36 votes in. So get your votes in and your likes. Do both of those. Let's see. What is your favorite motor platform of all time? Whatever the next one that I'm working on. I don't have one. I don't have my favorite, and I honestly don't think other people should either. But at the same time, I do think that they should. I think it's fantastic that guys like the thing that they like, as long as you don't come here and try to tell people that their thing is bad because your thing is good, because those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Dustin, so my videos help you with your LQ9 swap? Nice. They should help you with making the power part of it, the swap part of it. There's not that much up there on that. Eric, did you see somebody, one of Cletus's tuners started to make, he's doing a cam business? So that's cool. I did mention you in a comment on the video about sending cams your way. I don't have any shortage of cams to test, and I think we have a pretty good idea on what cams do now. 408 stroker, S480 turbo. Any suggestions for fuel injectors? Want to make around 900 horsepower? Are you doing it with the 85 or are you doing it with gas? But The 80-pound injectors are usually the go-to things, but and 8-pounders will get you to 900 at the flywheel, but probably not on E85 though. AAR Don Jr. Unrelated. I built an LA 318 stock, a roller. So is it a late model one? The right before they switched over to the Magnum, is that what the ROL is? Stock stamp rockers, a roller cam, 515, 530. Shave the heads on nothing on the deck. Tighten it down the rocker and take push rod loose. Too short. Why would the stock rocker be too short? It should be way too long with that combination. If you have, if you put a roller rocker in there, unless it was already a factory roller and that's what you're talking about, if you've milled the head, that should require a shorter push rod. If you didn't change anything, I don't know what the base circle is on the cam that you put in there. It sounds like it's not a stock one. So if the base circle changed on the cam, that could change your rocker need. So Bill, I don't understand what are you not liking the question? Is that what you're saying? Or that it's too boring for you? Well, you know what? The nice thing about that is you don't have to be here. You could go somewhere else and get a more exciting question. Let's see, some great testing results. You need all shiny, colorful anodized titanium fasteners. Yeah, I don't have like anodized fastener money. I broke a ring putting a last piston in. It's always the last one, right? That's what happens. I guess I'll upgrade a total seal. I have broken rings before. I go get like I'll buy one new ring or I'll go get one used ring from the wrecking yard. Like I'm not above that either. Have you done anything with diesels? I had a Cummins diesel in a Dodge dually, and we did a couple of things to that, but we don't run them. I don't run them on the engine dyno. Which of the two Rev 9 TX 7268 turbos is better for a high performance 3800 with forged pistons and rods? Well, are you trying to make 600 or 700 horsepower? And both turbos can make the same power with a different AR. That's certainly possible. You don't have a favorite because you haven't run a rotary yet. That's not true. I haven't run one on the engine dyno, but I have run them on the chassis dyno a few times. Big block Fords love nitrous. I think that that's probably true of any motor. I think that they all do. Richard, you're awesome. I believe you're holding back to get a bigger audience. What am I holding back? I don't understand. I don't understand people's like weird conspiracy theories that they're cooking something up in their mind and they think something is going on or they want something to be going on when in reality that's just not the case. I patiently await the day you get a rotary on the engine dyno. I'd like to do that. It would be cool. Can you explain why people with solid cams like solid flat tappets or solid rollers, or does it matter to you? They might want to tighten the lash up for a street car so that it doesn't make as much noise, is the only thing I could think. Tightening the lash up is going to make the cam bigger, and it's going to be less responsive down low. So you'd think you'd want to put more lash in it, but that might just be for a noise thing. The lowest AR will get me to 700 horsepower faster. It's not going to get you to 700 horsepower faster, but it is going to be more responsive, relatively speaking. I've done AR testing, so the AR testing is not just a function of the AR. It's going to be a function of a lot of things. The AR is a fairly small thing in terms of the change in what the turbo does. The whole size of the turbo and then the NA power output of the motor that you're putting it on, and where that motor makes power and how much low speed power it has, all of that is way more important than the kind of AR change that you're talking about. You might be hard pressed to a 68 is going to be fairly tight. If you're not looking for immediate response, then I probably would go with a bigger AR on that. Off subject. There's no subject though on the live feeds once we're doing question and answer stuff. An L9H62 is a good motor. It responds in the same way that all the other 62s do. That's right. We forgot about that, Admiral, that it's a 50 horsepower and a bazillion in cool factor. It does. I mean, it looks, there's no doubting how cool we get. It's hard to even describe. There's no doubting how cool that is. You look at that and you go, yeah, it's got the polished, shiny dominators on there and the tunnel ram, and it's got cool linkage, and it had AN fittings, from the fuel lines going up from the dyno and stuff. It really did look good. I mean, I don't have that kind of money to do that, but it is nice. If you really chase clickbaity titles, thumbnails, bring in girls on the channel, you could grow your audience. Yeah, that's you've noticed that I haven't done any of that. That's not what I'm doing. Sandbagging for more views would be a novel strategy. So I want to not put stuff up so that I get less views. I don't know that that's like not selling stuff because you want to hold out, and I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me. Well, changing my heads on my 6-liter give me more power with the Holley intake. Do you have a Holley intake, or are you asking if you should get a Holley intake? And which 6-liter do you have? Are they 317 heads? Ported heads will add power. Ported heads will add more power if the rest of the motor isn't stock. If you have a cam, the ported heads will add more power if you already had a cam. I don't know that there's a Holley intake manifold that I would recommend for your 6-liter unless you're wanting to run lots of RPM. How much power should I expect again with a cold air intake on a 96 Vortec? Well, where is the factory air intake grabbing air right now? Is it not getting cold air like from in the fender well or something? I doubt that the factory would have grabbed air on a factory air induction system from anywhere but the fender well, and the fender well is already going to be cold air. So if you're only talking about changing like the flow rate or design of the tube or something, it's going to be less than if you just had an open filter and then you actually had a dedicated cold air, because the air temperature is going to make a difference. And if it's a mass air car, which I think that motor is, you don't have to change the tune on it. I have enough drama during the day. Yeah, we all do. Everybody here is busy and doing a bunch of stuff. Will a 351 Cleveland bolt up to a 5-speed Transit comes in an 83 5-liter Mustang? It looks like they have the same bell housing. Is a Cleveland and a Windsor the same bell housing? Has the VS Racing turbo technology and cast turbo surpassed Borg Warner's? As an absolute thing, I would say that that's not a real question, because there's no way that every VS Racing turbo is better than every, I guess we could say, comparable Borg Warner turbo. And again, what do you mean by better? What if one of them responds better but makes less power on the top? I mean, there'd be all kinds of discussions to have in there, and that isn't the discussion that you should have. What you should have is like, what turbo do I need to make the power that I want? And probably either one of those companies would be able to do that for you. I'm going to tear it down and upgrade the rotating assembly and then boost it to the moon. Doesn't roller allow for crazier profiles on a flat tappet? Yes, you can get away with a different ramp rate and more engine speed with a roller than you can with a flat tappet as an ultimate thing. Tunnel ram with twin dominators versus Kinsler mechanical fuel injection. So do we have to run methanol carburetors too? I'm about to build an EFI 460 converted to carb on my 80 F-150, deciding what to buy first. You probably will pick up power going from that factory EFI setup to like a dual plane carburetor, I would think. What have I done with my Mustang? Nothing. I haven't seen my Mustang in years. Michael, love the content. The only YouTuber I've seen that backs their information with a dyno. Others just tell you I'm right because I'm on YouTube. I think that last statement probably would almost as incorrect because they are on YouTube, right? For a lot of people. What do you think about fabricated LS intakes? Are they any good? I have lots of videos up on what they do, so you can decide for yourself. Lots of people choose those because they look good and they look fancy, and they do. They're polished and look shiny, and they look a lot better than any of the factory LS intake manifolds. They don't, however, perform as good as those others. Certainly not from 6,000 or more on down. Those are short runner intake manifolds, so they lose power down low. And by down low, I mean from 6,000 or more and below, they lose power. I'm curious if cams like the Texas Speed Chop Monster and Comp Thumper have performance benefits over their non-chop same size counterparts. The thing is, you're assuming that a Thumper cam or Chop Monster or whatever has an equivalent other cam. It really doesn't, because one of those has probably 10 or 12 more degrees of exhaust duration and a different LSA. So it is really a different cam, even if they both shared the same intake duration, which I guess you could use as a metric to measure both of those. But they are different cams. And a Thumper cam, I don't know what the Chop Monster specs are, but the Comp Thumper cams seem to make power, but they were done primarily because guys want, they want idle clips. I went to Gap my L33 rings today, and they were at 29 and 30 from the factory. Where were you measuring those? I've never seen anything that big before, not on coming out of something that was running. What have I done to my Mustang? I haven't done anything. I haven't seen it for a long time. So the Cleveland is the small block forward bell housing, but the M's are the 460 bell housings. 429. I'm an LQ9 with stage 2 or 3 BTR cam, and if I need to know if I need to get rec port heads or just port the heads it came with a Holly intake or a BTR intake. I don't recommend the BTR intake manifold. It's a very short runner and very high RPM. I don't recommend a high ram because it's a little bit longer, but still short. I don't know where you want to make power. What RPM range do you want to make power? And what is it you're trying to do with it? And a rec port head is probably cheaper than, you could probably get a set of rec port heads cheaper than you can either ported 317 heads or an aftermarket cathedral port head would be better than both of those, like a TrickFlow 225 or an Airflow Research or that kind of thing would make more power. But again, you're just talking about balancing how much am I getting and then how much am I spending. Are you eventually going to run boost on this? We have a lot of questions. If you're looking for power 350-ish on the budget on a 350 Vortec, what would you do? I would just have the Vortec heads machined so you put springs on them, and then you could put a cam and a dual plane intake manifold and a carburetor on it, and it will make 350. You should test the Typhoon intake manifolds, the Speedmaster ones. Using the adapter seen on Power Nation. What adapter are you talking about? Have you ever tested a David Vizard spec cam? No, I haven't. Big block Ford. Yesterday mentioned it wouldn't be drivable very well. Peak torque was 5,300, horsepower 6,500. I'll need a cam swap for a 2,500 to 3,000 RPM range on the street. Yeah, that's a really big cam that's more of a race motor kind of camshaft. And with the tunnel ram, it made peak power at 71 or 7,200. The adapter takes the EFI throttle body intake off and adapts it to a carb. So is the adapter just because the EFI intake on the 460 has the upper elbow that mounts the throttle body to the lower intake manifold? There's an adapter that removes that upper part, but the lower manifold still stays the same, and then adapts a carburetor to it? That's not the route that I would go. I say that, and I haven't tested it, but I don't think that EFI manifold was designed to run with a carburetor feeding it where they're feeding it. And while it might run, and maybe they tested it, maybe it works great. I don't know. I would pick a dual plane intake manifold over that combination. But I'd like to see that tested kind of now that you're bringing that up. It made 290 horsepower and 460 foot-pounds. Recals in the house. Tristan was the motor? I'm gonna have to watch it, I guess. Was the motor stock? I don't watch it be dead even on air fuel across the board. That'd be cool. I'm open to that. Like I said, I don't care if it does or it doesn't do, as long as it does or it doesn't do, and we get to data log it. I'm curious. I don't even know what the inside of the 460. I've never even looked at a 460 EFI manifold off of a vehicle. I mean, I've walked by a bunch of them while I'm in the wrecking yard, but I don't ever remember seeing one off of a vehicle so I could see what the flow path is, like what's going on inside there. Is GTSY good to see you? It's all the hip lingo. 45% are saying yes, that they would spend the money for the tunnel ram. Because you know what happens if you have two carburetors? Then you could have two blowers or two turbos blowing into those carburetors. I wanted to do that way back on the tunnel ram that we had on the 5-liter Ford. Trying to make horsepower out of my LQ9. What I need to do to reach 600. Tommy, take a look at the videos I have up on making 600. If you're trying to make 600 from a 6-liter, it's going to take way more than the stuff that you're talking about. It's going to take really good ported heads, a really good size camshaft, and a really good intake manifold. It's going to be, and the one that I did took pistons too, so that we could put enough camshaft in it, so you'd have you're limited in available piston to valve clearance. So we put forged pistons in it that had valve relief, so we could put a bigger camshaft in it. But we were able to make 600 out of a 6-liter, but it's not easy, and it's not going to be a really drivable deal. Adding boost to a stock one is much more drivable. Are you familiar with coefficient of discharge pertaining to intake and exhaust? Yes. Coefficient of discharge is actually the flow rate at the different lifts relative to the intake or exhaust valve. What about a Sniper 4500 and a QFT? I don't know what a QFT 101 is, but a Sniper 4500 is that the 4-hole throttle body thing? Have you noticed that big blocks take longer to rev up versus a small block due to the extra rotating? I'd like to actually see somebody demonstrate that to me. The time that it takes to free rev is not an indication on the power output. So people have a hard time understanding that. So you could have we have a big block that's 600 horsepower. We have a small block that's 400 horsepower. If the small block revs faster, it still makes less power, and it would make less power and would accelerate a vehicle slower than the 600 horsepower big block would, even if it's not revvy. Because you can change that. You can change the response rate, the free rev response rate, with lightweight rotating assemblies, like not just the crankshaft and rods and pistons and stuff, but things like dampeners and flywheels and flex plates and all of that stuff. And so again, that may or may not be worth horsepower. Wilson Manifolds quoted me $850 for a port match and $950 for an EFI conversion on a 351 RPM air gap. That makes $500 intake, a $2,300 intake for 24 horsepower. No, I wouldn't do that either. I personally wouldn't. And quite honestly, if you took that dual plane intake manifold and didn't convert it, and you converted the port injection versus running it with a carburetor, the carburetor will make more power than the port injection will. So there'd be no reason to do that. That would not be a good thing. I do not recommend that. That's why when people ask me, yeah, I want to go to fuel injection, I'm like, you have an older carbureted motor that runs probably pretty good. I think I'd stay with that, because the problem is that they believe that the fuel injection is going to give them everything that they have now plus more. And I've seen lots of cases where that doesn't actually happen. Reloading. You want to test how changing the coefficient of friction affects power. But what you're really doing is changing the flow rates of the heads to be able to do that. So you're testing either different heads or the same heads that you have modified, and the coefficient of friction is just an expression of that. So you're testing something different than you're talking about. Does a single plane have better fuel distribution than a single plane with a throttle body injection like a Holley Sniper? You mean, does a single plane with a carburetor have better fuel distribution than a single plane with a throttle body injection? Is that your question? Because otherwise it seems like the single planes are the same on both of those, and then the distribution that's dictated by the intake manifold is going to stay the same. How would an individual sprint car stack injection compare to tunnel rams? I think that the stack injection might even be a little better. What would usually happen depending on the stack length is it's going to make more low speed power. It might be that the tunnel ram would be better on the top, again, depending on what stack length you're talking about, because the length of the stack is going to determine its effective operating range, basically. And then the stack injection, how much power it will support, how much it will flow, is going to be a function of the throttle blade size and the bore size of the stack injection that you've chosen. Isn't fuel injection the reason that a modern engine with 200,000 miles on it doesn't have a cylinder ridge? I think that's probably part of it, but carbureted motors can run very well also. And like if you look at the difference between a Ford engine that was carbureted and a Chevy engine that was carbureted, the Ford has less ridge on it. So metallurgy also comes into play. So like the amount of nickel that's in the block and stuff, I think an LS block, even if you ran it carbureted, would not have the ridge in it. And like I said, with the Fords, it was kind of the same way. That engine's a 408. I have Holley HP FI, and that's why I want to go to port ejection. Yeah, I understand that. I meant a dual plane versus a single plane with a Sniper EFI. The dual plane and the single plane, irrespective of whether you're supplying it with a Sniper EFI or carburetor, because I'm going to eliminate that, and we're going to assume that both of those would work on both of those manifolds. I've seen where that's not the case sometimes. But if they were both working on both of those manifolds, you're definitely going to see a difference in the distribution between a single plane and a dual plane, and not universally single plane versus dual plane as one good, one bad. I've seen both of them be good and both of them be bad. So it would depend on the specific ones that you're talking about. And then also the goodness and the badness, or the spread, the range of spread between different cylinders, what air fuel that different cylinders have, changes during the RPM range too. So they get better or worse, and different ones get better and worse. It's the answer is always it depends. As always, where are we on our poll? 53% saying no and 47% saying yes, with 112 votes. And it's interesting that I'd like to track that and see how the poll changes as we add more and more votes. Obviously, initially, you could make it, you could skew it dramatically. You could have two votes in that are all yes or all no. So it could be 100% either way, or you could be 50-50, or you could be 100% the other way. But as you start gaining more votes, the percentage should become more stable. But we saw a very similar poll percentage with 20 or 30 votes, and it stayed fairly consistent all the way through. So that's interesting. I'm not sure what you mean by testing something different. Just the flow of the exhaust would be increased by my idea. But you're not going to change the coefficient of friction by the coefficient of discharge is not going to change on the intake side by changing the exhaust flow, because coefficient of discharge is the flow rate of the intake port relative to at different levels relative to the valve size. So you can change the coefficient of discharge on the exhaust side by changing the flow rate of the exhaust and or the exhaust valve size. But again, you're not just changing the coefficient of discharge, you're changing the flow rate. So you're porting the head. So you're making a change, and we're describing it as something, but What if somebody said, "Hey, I just ported the exhaust and we tested it and it did this"? That's not really a specifically a coefficient of discharge. It's really hard to do that, to only change that and not change the other things. Have you ever used straight through mufflers? Yes, all the time. All of our stuff on the dyno usually, well, not always. 99.9% of the time, if we run a muffler on the dyno, it is a straight through type muffler. Richard gets a kid get a gold tooth. You look like Major Payne. That is a good funny. That is a funny movie. Justin, you're putting a 6500 throttle body on an LS3. I've seen those manifolds. That is a lot of throttle body, and I think I think you'd be at zero vacuum even at a 4500, probably on an LS3. But the good thing is there's no such thing as too big, because it's not going to hurt you at all. So reloading, you just want to test and see what happens if we just port the exhaust? Is that what you're asking? Do they quiet the motor down significantly? Yes, having any, like we run Flowmaster headers that are straight through. They have some sort of perforation inside, but there's no change in direction of anything. And running those mufflers definitely quiets it down. It's still going to be loud by street levels, but it's way better than having just open pipes the way that we normally run it, which is just awful anymore. I heard increasing the throttle body size makes a car less streetable. Is there any truth to that? There is truth on one side and not truth on the other side. The not truth on the other side is that a lot of people seem to associate losing torque with too big of a throttle body, and that doesn't happen. That's a myth. Where you potentially lose streetability is the opening rate of a big throttle body. So whether it's a big oval blade or this big multi-blade thing, is when you have a much faster, because they're bigger, let's say a bigger opening rate, when you crack it like 10%. Now, because the blade is 100 millimeters instead of 50 millimeters, it's not like we've doubled the amount of flow. We may have tripled or quadrupled it or whatever. And the problem is being able to ease the throttle, so you do very light throttle driving. That can become more difficult with really big throttle bodies, especially the case on positive displacement supercharge applications with big throttle bodies, because they really want the airflow. So it can make the thing jerky. That can happen, but they don't ever lose low speed power. In fact, it's going to feel like it gained a whole bunch, because like I said, it's very, very responsive. So you're like, I picked up a lot of power. No, you just picked up airflow relative to the throttle percentage opening. Have you ever tried dual length stacks like an old Can-Am car? Yes, we've run. I've run different intake manifolds that had adjustable length stacks, as you will. And we did this like if you look at the fast adjustable manifold, it has longs and shorts and mediums. And so what we did was we put, I don't remember if we did longs and shorts or longs and mediums, but we made a single plane intake manifold. Basically, we had the outside runners have longer ones, and then the inside runners have shorter ones. And in our case, it just made less power. Because the medium and the short runners, while they might make a little bit more very peak power, they made less power in the RPM range where this motor wanted to make power. So they were just not good. So the long runners were the way to go. And so having the shorter stacks, sometimes they do that to try to team that with the good and the bad big block ports. I would like to see if some of these guys that have run and then you also have to do it so that they fit, because some guys want the full radius air horn, and you just can't have those right next to each other. So they have to be either shorter and longer or staggered and aimed out in different ways. So, all they do is when you change the length of the stack, whether you do that on one or you do that on 8 of them or any number in between, it changes the effective RPM range of that runner or that cylinder where it wants to make power. Single plane intake manifolds do the same thing. They have long ones on the outside and short ones in the middle, and they do the same thing. Those 4 runners make power at a different, the outer 4 runners make power at a different RPM range than the middle 4 runners. And I know people are thinking, well, that's ideal. Well, we combine we have a broader torque curve by doing that. No, usually it just is bad. Let's see. What's the maximum stroke cubic inches you recommend on a big block Ford? We normally only go to 557 is kind of the limit for the stuff that I've done. My big block Chevy picked up 27 horsepower on a chassis dyno by adding straight through mufflers. Went from Flowmaster Super 40s to Cherry Bombs. That I haven't seen wheel horsepower gains like that from those 2 mufflers that you're talking about. Was there something restricting the Flowmasters or something, or was one of the runs cold and one of the runs hot? Richard Maskin from Dart said, what good heads are missing is a good exhaust port. So I made a good exhaust port. Exhaust side is more important. He may have said that, and obviously he's a sharp guy and knows way more about heads, way more than I'll ever know. What I can tell you is nobody in Pro Stock believes that. Everybody in Pro Stock has skewed this so that the intake valve and the intake flow is gigantic, and the exhaust port and flow and valve size is just there because it's what fits with the intake that they did. So, I think picking one over the other is like picking lift over duration or LSA over duration or whatever. I don't think you should do that. I don't think that that's important. There's no way that I would, like, if I had a 5-liter Ford and I wanted to pick up power, there's no way that I would just port the exhaust, because that would be foolish. And I also wouldn't just port the intake, because I think that would be also foolish. I wouldn't ever pick just one of them. If you're going to port it, you port both of them and get more flow from both of them and make more power. Goodwrench style 350. If you change one thing, if I'm assuming it already has an intake manifold on it and a carburetor and headers and a distributor on it and it's running, the one thing that you should change is the camshaft. The camshaft, you have to change springs too, because a camshaft is going to need springs, but the camshaft is what's going to make the most power. Big blades don't like to idle well. You can run into that. Michael, what motor are you changing the valve size on? Chaps 88. Again, I think I just went over why are you just wanting to pick one thing, unless it's just a rhetorical question. The camshaft is the thing that's going to give you the biggest change if you have the other things are stock. But like a 5-liter Ford, all of the other stock things are also limiting at some point. So you're still reloading. You're still wanting to test just exhaust. Here's what I suspect will happen. If you, let's say you pick some combination of peanut port head or whatever, and you have some because the test motor that you're testing on is going to determine whether or not you get gains. If you're doing this testing on a stock motor, it's going to do hardly anything. If you do it on a motor that wants the airflow, and that's very important, if you have a peanut board head and it's restrictive and you add exhaust flow, it should add power. But if you port the exhaust side, I would think that it could add power. But when you port the intake, it's also going to add power. And I'll bet you if you did the exhaust port first, and I would guess it would do this in either direction. If you ported the exhaust first and ran the head and ran it on the dyno, and then did the intake port, and as long as you increase the flow rate and did a good job on the porting where it improved airflow all the way through the lift range, especially in the lift range that you're running this on, my guess is that the intake flow would make more of a difference. But it's only going to make more of a difference if the motor combination that you've put together needs more airflow. If you have a 400 horsepower motor and the head already flows enough to support 500 horsepower, and you port either one of those, the gains that you're going to get are going to be much, much less. It's just not going to be significant. Ported heads don't automatically add power to every combination. They only add it to the thing that needs more airflow. And so the interesting test would be to have heads that flow 200 CFM, and you have a combination that can make 500 horsepower, and then you port the exhaust and see what happens, and you port the intake and see what happens, and then do the test again with another same set of heads, and then port the intake first, and then port the exhaust first, and then see which one of those responds more. Again, you're going to want to do both of them because both of them are going to make the most power. One of you will not find one of them adds all the power and then the other one does nothing. And I think that that's kind of what people want. Oh, I only want to do one of them because I want to find which one makes the most. I don't think that you're going to find that, but that doesn't stop it from being an interesting test. Joe's Fox Body. Richard, have you ever heard of a company called Cam Research in Colorado? Yeah, Cam Research Corp. That's also MPG heads. Those are the guys that did, if you look at part one, those are the guys that did the ported 460 heads and the camshaft for the combination that made 600 horsepower. And they are fantastic people and they know their stuff. They know how to make power. You port your nostrils. Yeah, you can. You can hog them out. Do you know if the 557s were blocks or prior to 79? I think that these were early blocks. I bought everything the ZZP has to offer with the 3800, just not the valves. Going with bigger valves can help as long as the porting done to the heads has done to accommodate the bigger valves. Does a Triton V10 count as a big block? It doesn't to me. It counts as a V10 as a specific thing. Oh, so a deviated septum. Yeah, that's not good. That is not bueno. Where are we at? 53% saying no, 47% saying yes. And we have 2 minutes left. See how quickly time has gone by already? So please make sure, go take a look at the Big Black Ford video, the second one in a row. That's 2 in a row. That's a series. So I got to do something else. I won't do another Big Black Ford in a row. We'll have to do something new. So I can go ahead and end my poll. Uh, 460 Ford versus a 427 FE. If they were both stock, the 427 side oilers rated at a lot more power. I mean, 375 was the highest 460, but I think 425 was the 427, as long as it's a side oiler like medium riser deal. But I don't have any FEs at all. And if I do, it's more than likely, if I find something, it's more than likely going to be Mark Sanchez has a 352, but I don't think I want to run that. I would like to run a 390 though. Have you ever weighed a 460 crank? I've never put one on a scale. John, take a look at the little cam that I ran in part 1 on one of the combinations. You can see it's a small cam is there's lots of good like kind of truck cams or RV cams. Reloading. Have you asked Vizard any of those questions? Maybe he's done a test where they've run just one, like just ported the exhaust and then put it on. If I was a porter, I would do that because that's something that I could do myself, but I am not. How about a big block Hemi? Yeah, I'm certainly not going to find a Gen 2 Hemi in the wrecking yard. I think those days are long gone. Hemis are real money to Ford made a 534. Yeah, I've seen those for the industrial applications. A lot of factory Ford heads have really bad exhaust flow. A lot of factory Ford heads have really bad intake flow too. 5-liter Ford head only flows 165 CFM. That's not very stellar. That's their performance head on the 5-liter. Excessive. I've got the 4th fastest Fiero in the country with the Turbo 3800. I'm behind Dark Horizon just to beat Tom L. 10-1 at 145. That's really good. That's a lot of mile an hour. What is that car 60 foot at? And what is the combination? I have a soft spot for 3800 Fieros. I like those. I'm curious as what kind of power that thing's making to run 145 trap speed. That's a lot of mile an hour. Uh, 140 60 foot times, a whole set, an HX40. Ooh, a 1465. That must be beefed up a lot to be running that kind of ET. 640 wheel horsepower. Okay. So what are they? Do you have ported stock heads on it? And what cam are you running in it? So that's got to be making good power then. How much boost is that excessive? Thunderjets. Yeah, you can find those. And in fact, I think we got the 1 460 from a Lincoln. I know that 68 460. That was an early one. That was a good score. Although Mark likes the 429s. Little motors, they rev. ZZP cam, I have to check the specs. Stock heads, lots of seat pressure. So not even ported heads? Are you running E85? And is this like 20? I'm going to take a shot here. 22 pounds of boost? Oh, high 30s in the boost. Okay. $42 to $25 psi. Does that mean you're running 42 and then it falls off to 25 at the top? Or is it 42 to 45? Oh, there we go. That's a lot of boost. I would think that you'd be able to make more power than that. So something's going on with that. Because I would think that 45 pounds from the right turbo, like on the motor that I had on the engine out, that's going to be way into 4 digits. So what I need to do excessive then is I need to get one of these big bang style motors and let you put it in your car, right? So that you can be making 750 at the tire. How do you torque your rod bolts on an LS? We do it according to the factory specs. What's the largest shot you sprayed on a big block Ford? I'm thinking it's a 250 or something. High PSI, low flow. Yeah, I don't know what that 40, I don't know what that HX turbo will support, but does it have an air to water intercooler? And what intake manifold are you running? Are you blowing through the the blower housing in the lower manifold? And does it have an air to water intercooler on it? And does it have rods and pistons and stuff in it? I'm curious. I would like to see one of these. I'd like to put together one of these motors and see it go in a car and go make some runs. Yeah, I don't do Mackenzie. I don't do factory bolts by stretch. One, I think I have L83 videos up, and you can make more than 500 horsepower with an L83 with the right BTR cam. I'd have to go back and look, but I think that they did. I think that they did with something that would fit in the stock piston to valve clearance. I can't swear to that. Yours will be the last question for tonight. I'll go ahead and do a little search here. Yeah, so they made 513, an L83. What do they have in it? Oh, great. There's no. That's an MSD intake, one of their cams, but I don't have any test data on it, though. Oh, Brian, you guys really need to do notes. That's awful. But yeah, I just don't know if I'd have to ask Brian to see if they put a piston in there, if they notched the piston to make that work. Stock L67 bottom, ARP rod bolts, regap the rings, MLS head gasket, ARP headsets. Okay. And then non-supercharged intake and internal spacer from ZZP to make it a short runner. Okay, I tested some of those on the channel. And what kind of RPM are you running on that thing? And did you say that it was an air-to-water intercooler? So you're running the NA intake manifold. Is it the composite one, or is it the aluminum one? $6,500. Okay. You need a ported head. And I'll bet. Find out what camshaft you have, and let me know what camshaft you have. But on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will be back tomorrow. If you have not, please go take a look at the Big Block Ford video. Tunnel rams and nitrous. Oh my.